Emma, why don't you start in on
Yeah.
this in terms of the Argentinian election? At that point, we didn't know the result, and now we do.
Well, we were more optimistic when we last spoke, Jacob, I guess, in late October. Just keep us up, or I guess update us on what happened after Milei underperformed in the first round of the elections, and there was hope potentially that the centrists would be able to take it over the finish line. And yet, no, the crazy Javier Milei will be the new leader of Argentina.
Right. So when we spoke in, I think it was in October, Emma, this was a few days after the general election. And I think it was either the next day or 2 days after our conversation, there was sort of a mass coalescing of the right-wing coalitions in Argentina around Milei. Patricia Bullrich, who was the Juntos por el Cambio candidate, came out and endorsed Milei formally. He also got an endorsement from Mauricio Macri, who is the former president of Argentina, also of the same kind of ostensibly center-right coalition, although I'm sure that a lot of people would take exception with the characterization of Juntos por el Cambio as center-right. I mean, if Milei weren't a candidate in this election cycle, it would be considered a pretty right-wing party, right-wing group. And basically, all sort of non-Peronist sectors of society ended up basically going to Milei in the runoff election that happened on Sunday, and that's how he ended up not only winning, but winning by more than 11%, which is a landslide.
Can you walk us through the how much power the president has relative to, let's say, maybe the United States, and in his ability to impose his agenda? Because I mean, A, I don't have a good sense of that, but B, does the coalescing of those center-right or right-wing groups around Milei, is that an indication that there's going to be there's a similar dynamic to, let's say, Trump and the Republican Party? Like, this is a warm body who's willing to sign off on our agenda. And so give us a sense of both those two questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always reluctant to draw direct comparisons between the United States and Argentina. I mean, they're just two radically different countries with different political makeups, but that's not that far off, truth be told. I think that Milei does not have a majority in Congress. He only has a handful of members from his coalition, which is called La Libertad Avanza, both in the Senate and in the Chamber of Deputies, which is like the House of Representatives for Argentina. But yeah, there are a large number of members from Juntos por el Cambio, and if they throw their weight behind him, which many of them will if they haven't already, there is reason to expect that he will be able to move forward with a legislative agenda. The president in Argentina has a fair amount of power. He can govern by what's called a DNU. I'm now blanking on the exact Spanish acronym for it, but it's like an executive order. There are limits to it, that would prevent him from eliminating taxes. He's called for a referendum on the legalization of abortion. He would need congressional support to go forward with that. So there are some limits there, but he has a fair amount of power. And if he has the support in Congress, which it appears he does right now, he will be able to govern, or at least I think that is a fair assumption now.
How many parties are in Congress?
Many.
Okay. Well, I mean, I just wanted to sort of establish that this is not essentially a duopoly. Right. I just want to establish there is an opportunity for him to sew together a coalition, and It explains in some respects why. Because it was sort of surprising that there was all of this coalescing around him, I would imagine, relative from the general election.
Yeah, I mean, what you saw within, Juntos por el Cambio is itself a very kind of interesting group. So to answer your question, there are a number of political parties within Argentina. A lot of them kind of work together as coalitions, as voting blocs. So even within Juntos por el Cambio, you'll have you have PRO, which is a conservative party. You have some more moderate kind of centrist parties, and together they kind of operate under the same banner of Juntos por el Cambio. As to why they coalesced around Milei, I mean, I think a lot of people really kind of cast an anti-Peronist vote. It's not, I think a better analog for this is what happened in Brazil when Bolsonaro won, where there was such a high level of anti-petismo, which is the PT, the kind of left party of Brazil, that was just, this was their vehicle, and they all hopped on board. And, you know, not unlike PT, there's some kind of basic things in common with the Peronist coalition. There's lots of charges of fraud. There's a lot of kind of conception that they are big spenders and using public funds for their own nefarious ends. And, you know, there is truth and great exaggeration to that characterization.
But unlike Brazil, I would say, I mean, based on our last conversation, and we actually had a caller call in yesterday to speak about this, the left in Argentina appears to be anemic and has been for quite a while. I mean, before Bolsonaro, there was Lula, and now there's Lula again, obviously. And then, you know, you can even look over at Boric and say, well, you know, Chile's obviously, their left is clearly more robust. But in Argentina, that hasn't really been the case, is my understanding. Why are those conditions the way that they are?
Well, it's sort of, it depends on how you want to look at the Peronists, which are this sort of chameleon-like coalition that can be sort of anywhere from center-right, which was the case under Menem at the beginning of the century, to, you know, more kind of conventionally center-left, which was the case under Nestor Kirchner and you know, to an extent Cristina after him. I'm not sure I would describe it as anemic so much as it's subsumed within this sort of larger coalition. But, you know, they have, with the exception of the 4 years in which Mauricio Macri governed, have been in power for decades. And so as Argentina's economy has gone from bad to worse, you know, there is a lot of rage at the kind of governing powers. And that is, the perception is, that is the left, that is the Peronists, that is, they've sort of changed their names constantly. This time around, it was Unión por la Patria. During the last election cycle, it was Frente de Todos. What happened in the previous administration, or the existing administration, the one that's soon to exit, Alberto Fernandez was sort of a hand-picked candidate by Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. He was the chief of staff under her husband, Nestor. And he was kind of meant to be a kind of compromise candidate for sort of the more left wing of the Peronist coalition and the more moderate wing of the coalition. And what ended up happening was a presidency that was neither left wing nor center. It was sort of neither. And, you know, it's been, by all metrics, a highly dysfunctional, you know, failed administration. Inflation has exploded. A lot of this wasn't entirely their fault. I mean, they got dealt a pandemic and war in Ukraine and sort of a succession of horrific events, kind of a historic drought that completely decimated Argentina's exports and emptied out their reserves of dollars. But, you know, they've completely failed to contain the damage, and now people are looking to punish them. And Milei has, you know, appeared at just the right time.
What, I mean, can you walk us through some of the policies that people anticipate that both A, he wants to implement, and B, he's going to be able to? I mean, it really seems like it's a bit of a black box as to what he's going to be able to do, because that's a function of the legislature, which it seems like they coalesced around him for a reason.
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, so give us a sense of like what, aside from the fact that he seems to be a lunatic, what is it on a material basis that people are anticipating that he might do?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm kind of reluctant to make any predictions about what he can and can't achieve in office. I think the best way to understand Milei is, he is not a right-wing populist exactly in the tradition of Bolsonaro or Trump. I mean, they share some rhetorical style and flourishes. But Milei is really, kind of a throwback to 90s era kind of, I hate to use this term just because it's thrown around endlessly and, it sort of has been sapped of all meaning, but neoliberalism in South America where, complete market freedoms and, cutting down the administrative state, as much as humanly possible. A sizable percentage of Argentina's workers are employed by a very large and ample state, and he has pledged to eliminate, 11 separate ministries. He claims that he's going to cut spending by 15% of GDP, eliminate, endless taxes, although it's not entirely clear which he's referring to sometimes. He's also promised to replace Argentina's public education system with a voucher system, although again, details are sparing about exactly what that looks like. He wants to end free public health care. What we've seen in recent weeks is that he shied away from, coming out and saying we're going to privatize Argentina's healthcare system, because I think that would have been electorally, a problem for him. But I'm not really sure that his plan basically doesn't ultimately result in that. I mean, if the idea is that it's no longer a free public service and you have to pay as you go, and Argentina's healthcare system has to compete with the private sector, you're basically handing it over to private companies. How much of that he's going to achieve, I don't know. We'll find out soon enough.
So we should say, when you're saying neoliberal, you're really talking like Montpellerin. This is like the pure stuff.
Well, he loves Milton Friedman, right? Yeah, he's praised Milton Friedman in the past or espoused those kinds of economics.
He idolizes the Chicago boys. Hayek is one of his biggest influences. I think he's named his dogs after Austrian economists. I mean, this is where he comes from.
Oh,
but I'm kind of eager to make that distinction, because it's very easy to say like, oh, Argentina now has this new Trump, and like this is something distinct.
There's more ideology. It seems here in many respects. How do people? When the idea of the Chicago boys coming back in, like, doesn't that where is the, I don't know, institutional, where is the national sort of memory of, like, is there no sort of visceral reaction to the idea of, Chicago libertarian, University of Chicago libertarians coming in, and what preceded that in terms of 30,000 people disappeared type of situation? Like, is that not what's going on with that?
I mean, these are all good questions. I'm of the mind that Argentina, in my experience living here and reporting from here, is extremely connected to that history and has reckoned with it in ways, that I think other nations who have lived under dictatorships haven't. There are a couple of things to keep in mind. Milei has a lot of support among young voters. I'm talking voters who are 16 to 30 who didn't necessarily live through the crisis of 2001 and certainly weren't alive during the dictatorship from 1976 to 1983.
Young men, right? Was what you said to me, right?
Yeah, I mean, he has support amongst a lot of different sectors of society, so I don't want to just assign that group as the ones responsible for electing him. But I think that, people are fed up. And I understand it. You go to the supermarket and like from week to week and sometimes day to day, you see the prices of these things soaring. And whether they truly believe that what Milei is offering is going to improve their material circumstances, I don't know. I can't tell you that. But I think they want to punish, the people in power. And it's, there seems to be a consensus that the Peronists have to go. And if that has to be Milei, then so be it.